Welcome to Scoreography, a podcast about the greatest sport on ice, figure skating. I'm Wendy Buskey.
And I'm Adrian Buskey, and this is kind of a weird one. This is going to be part one of a Olympic retrospective on the 2022 Beijing Olympics. Worth noting, we recorded this first episode last summer. So we recorded this in June or July of 2024 in the off season, and then for a bunch of different reasons, just didn't put it out. Now, this past week of skating has had virtually nothing happening for a little while, so there really wasn't much to talk about.
Off week.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of stuff to talk about for this next week, but for the time being, we thought that we would pull this thing out of the archives, and it felt particularly relevant because of its relation to the upcoming Olympics.
Exactly. We are officially 1 year from the Milano Cortina 2026 Games, so this felt timely again. And to be fair, it's a retrospective, but it's also a bit of a forecast in that we're not totally predicting what we expect to happen, but we're looking at particularly the skaters that we expect to also be in Milano Cortina and see how they've evolved.
Yeah, so the point of this is not really to completely relive the experience. It's much more about looking at the skaters who were there and mapping a trajectory from one Olympics to the next. Because a lot has changed in those couple of years, as you would expect, but a lot of these skaters have leveled up significantly and changed a lot in their character of their skates and their abilities as well.
Yeah, and in this part one, we'll be talking about the pairs competition from the Beijing Games as well as the men's competition. In part two, we'll speak about the very divisive and interesting women's competition and the dance competition. But today, it's pairs and men's.
Yeah, and notably, we haven't recorded that other session, so that'll happen sometime probably in this off season. But
yeah, pretty much after Worlds, I would expect.
Yeah, but let's let Adrian and Wendy from 8 months ago tell you the story of this now, and then we'll be back at the end to give you a few follow-up thoughts, considering this is so far after the fact. So the inspiration from this comes from several different requests from you, our listeners. We've had people asking for us to do a road to the Olympics, predictions ahead of time. We've gotten several requests for that. And I'm never sure quite how to handle that because we're in the middle of the quadrennial. So we're halfway through. It's 2 years and a lot can change in 2 years. But we are also in that 2 years past the Olympics when you start seeing major retirements. Like we just saw the retirement of Shoma Uno, and that changes the landscape of the men's competition in a significant way. And I think the best way to kind of figure out where it's all going is to step back 2 years and look at that previous Olympics and see how much has changed over 2 years. And we've also gotten requests for that retrospective because this show didn't exist yet at that point.
No.
So we never did an Olympics 2022 series. So this is really going to be essentially a 3-part thing. We're going to, in this episode, in part one, we're going to talk about pairs and men's from Beijing 2022. In the following episode, in part two, we will talk about the super complicated women's event and the super deep ice dance event at Beijing 2022. And then in the following episode, we will take all those things that we have figured out and learned here and try to apply it to our look ahead to the 2026 Games in Milano Cortina.
Yeah, we feel like everybody's thinking about the Olympics right now, and so are we. So let's jump in and maybe start with pairs in 2022, because I gotta admit, I don't think, having now rewatched that entire competition, I was paying attention enough in 2022. The pairs was actually the last competition of the Beijing Olympics, which, to your point about the women's event, super complicated.
Kind of overshadowed a lot of other things.
Yeah. Frankly, I was so focused on the gold medal winners of Sui and Han and that competition of them being in China and being Chinese and being the favorites coming in. I was so pumped for that I feel like I just wasn't paying enough attention to everyone else. So this experience of rewatch was actually quite wonderful.
There's also a number of people that over the last 2 seasons that we have said, oh, I feel like this team came out of nowhere, or I don't remember this skater. And people have said, oh, well, they were at the Olympics. You should remember them.
Right.
And then I'll go back and look and say, okay, yeah, they were at the Olympics, but with a different partner. And some people who are very notable now really weren't that memorable at the Olympics in a pretty stacked pairs competition. Something that really stood out to me as we were rewatching the pairs is why we were so gloomy on pairs at the start of this show in the 2022-23 season, because after so many of these teams either retired or weren't allowed to compete because of the Russian war on Ukraine or China pulling out of competition for a couple of years, and the playing field changed so dramatically. And so in that 2022-23 season, when we would talk about pairs, it was often this, like, there weren't as many teams. It wasn't very strong. There was a lot of doubles. It felt very junior, and it was very much a rebuilding season after this. Watching this was a reminder of how much really strong talent was at the Olympics, and also how many people have come up in a big way since then.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we can start with Luka Burlava and his former partner, Karina Safina, who admittedly I did not remember at all from the Olympics. Nothing. It was gone. And they were very solid. They weren't necessarily exciting. I think he and his current partner, Anastasia Midolkina, have a much better rapport on ice. And I think the results show that pretty clearly.
Yeah. I mean, going back and watching this, they were one of the first teams out of the gate where we were like, oh, there's Luka. Okay. You know, he's been very significant in this last year with Anastasia Midolkina. And this partnership, it just felt like there was zero personal or emotional connection between the two of them. Karina Safina seemed like a very strong skater in her own right. There were certainly points where Luka did not look as strong here as what we've seen in this past season. They just had really fairly average lifts overall. And there were just times where it felt like two separate performances. Like they just were not a connected pair on the ice.
Absolutely. And while you could see that raw talent, it made me so happy that they split, because I feel like it, just looking at the difference between Luka there and the Luka we have seen this past season, it is like a different skater, in my opinion.
They were still a team going into the 2022-23 season. There was injury that kept him out kind of in the second half. And then apparently Luka was the one who ended the partnership. I think Karina was looking for somebody else for a while, but has just not seemed to have kind of resurfaced since then. But obviously, Burlava's partnership with Midolkina has been far more productive in the sense that they are the junior world champions. They've performed really well on the Grand Prix and beyond. And while they definitely had some flaws that became more apparent towards the end of this past season, they were still so exciting. And again, it's that illustration of why they're memorable as a team, but Burlava and Safina were not memorable to me. Another person that I had felt came out of nowhere, only to realize going back and looking at this that we had been seeing him for quite a while before, was the Italian skater Matteo Guarisi, who has been so exciting in this past season with his new partner, Lucrezia Beccari. They're a team we just talked about in our season Golden Our Hearts recap that for me at the beginning I was really cold on, and by the end of it I was really into, especially by the time that they won Europeans. They're just such an exciting team together, so much charisma, so much fun. And here again, this is a reminder of how that change of a teammate can shift the entire feel of a team in such a massive way.
Absolutely. Like his former partner, Nicole Della Monica, I thought it was interesting that you had made the comment that you remembered her, but not him at all.
Yes, she stuck out in my memory, but Matteo had not.
Right. And watching them here, it felt like they were connected. I felt like they had a great rapport with each other. They were a team for a really long time, so it's not surprising that they were very comfortable with each other. But you could sort of already see that she was not at her best at the Olympics in Beijing. She had some issues overall and just didn't look peak here at all.
Yeah, there was definitely the sense that she had passed her peak moment and Matteo had not hit his yet. There's moments too that are problems where she's far more up and out and he feels very stoic and unemotive in places. And we have seen that a few times early on with Lucrezia, where he can be very focused to the point of not expressing in the same way. But I think that's improved a ton over this last season. But yeah, here it was very much that sense of like he had a lot more to give and it felt like she was at the end of the road, and she retired soon after this. So we have the benefit of hindsight in looking at that. But Nicole Della Monica was really wonderful to watch on ice. Such a great personality overall. And like you said, as soon as she showed up, I was like, oh yes, I remember really liking her. And yet Matteo had not stood out to me at all.
Yeah.
And now I feel like he's one of those guys that I'm always excited to see on the ice when he comes out with Lucrezia.
Well, he has such a vibe. There's something about Matteo where he's ready to be everybody's hype man. You can kind of feel it.
Yeah.
But I did think, speaking of teams that you remember one but not the other, and now you know why, it's Minerva Haase and her former partner, Nolan Siegert. they unfortunately were not great here. They're short, not bad, but not impressive. You could immediately see that she was the star of that team. She had all of her charisma and grace on the ice that Minerva has with her current partner, Nikita Volodin, was absolutely evident there. But her tech skills certainly were not as up to par as they are now.
Minerva, like you said, has all that brightness, but still was skating a little junior at that point. Nolan, though, this guy came into this competition, into the Olympics, with a real struggle. He'd been recovering from COVID. They were Germany's only pairs team. And because he'd had COVID during the team event, and we're not covering the team event as part of this retrospective, but because he had COVID, they couldn't compete in that competition, which meant Germany as a team had to pull out entirely from the team event. Ugh. And so he did test negative in time for the pairs event, but he was still obviously recovering, wasn't at full power. They had not had the training time. And they had an absolute disaster of a long program at the Olympics.
I'm really glad that I had forgotten that program. I'm sure that they both would love to never speak of it again. It was so deeply unfortunate with 2 failed lifts. The jumps were just not there. It just felt like they were both completely devastated by the end of it.
Yeah, to see 2 lifts fail in an Olympic free skate is a kick in the teeth. It is just awful. I felt so bad for the 2 of them. After the World Championships, which went better for them, they ended up splitting. Seeger apparently looked for a new partner afterwards, but failed to find one and then decided to retire. Obviously, Minerva has now gone on to quite a lot of success with her new partner, Nikita Volodin, and they are such an exciting team, especially this year just came through in such a big way on the Grand Prix. I just love watching them, and I'm really interested for their trajectory. But you can see here 2 years and a different partner has made a massive difference for Minerva. It's night and day.
So another team that was a little bit different in terms of our feelings then and now was Cheng Peng and Yang Jin, who came in 5th overall and were amazing. Beautiful to watch. Cheng Peng since has now switched partners to Li Wang. I don't know if Yang Jin has a new partner.
He didn't officially retire, but he hasn't seemed to have been able to find a new partner since then. So I don't think that he's been on the circuit in a while.
But my gosh, this short program especially just blew me away.
It was spectacular. They were incredible. Again, in having watched Cheng Peng and her new partner, I'm never sure if it's Cheng Peng or Cheng Peng, because I know some people who it's P-E-N-G, it's pronounced Peng. So I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly.
Same, yeah.
But she is a lovely skater. And with her new partner, they're obviously in the building block stage where they are just putting things together. And
there's a lot of potential, but they're not quite there yet.
Right, but they have lovely quality. But this is the one case where looking at that previous version of the team, it was all there. I mean, their lifts, their throws, and their free skate, they have this final lift that is just out of this world. An incredible entry, beautifully executed. They're so lyrical and emotional and evocative together. That was the one time I think during this whole thing where I watched a team that has since split and been like, oh my gosh, that's a loss.
Yes, it is. It really did feel that way.
Even though, again, no disrespect to her new partner because he is great and they are steadily improving. But what was happening here was just amazing. So you can see that this is her moving on here. She's taking a step back to rebuild over what they had at this time. Now, my understanding is that she and Yang Jin split because they just could not come to an agreement of really what they wanted to do going forward past that season. I think it was amicable. It's essentially the creative differences kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, both incredible skaters. It's kind of a shame that we don't see them continuing on. But again, I do like her new partnership. It's just, this was better.
One more team I want to make sure we cover because they've moved up so much in this past season is Rebecca Gallardi and Filippo Ambrosini. They were not great here, if I'm being honest. For all that they have proven to be an improving partnership over the past few years, and they've had a great year overall together. This certainly looked more like a junior team that was at the Olympics and figuring out where they could fit in, but didn't yet get there.
So this is a team where I look at, okay, 2 years ago at their first Olympics, their short program was awful, was not good at all. There's a reason why we didn't remember them from it. They had 2 falls. Everything was really erratic. It's that Mambo Italiano program.
I hate the
which
Mambo Italiano.
I just can't with that. Their free skate was fairly redemptive, but it was still rough. It was still very junior. You could see that Filippo was already very steady, but Rebecca has come a long way in 2 years. And so this is a case where we can see we've got 2 years of competitions. And in that 2 years, this team has gone from being fairly bottom of the pack to being a really noteworthy team that is very enjoyable. And if you've seen any of the gala exhibition things they've been doing in the off season this year, it's astonishing. I mean, their ability to perform for a crowd and deliver really gorgeous programs has elevated massively.
I think that's what I notice most is that it's not just their technical ability, it's their presentation. They know how to engage a crowd so well. And you can see little hints of that from their Olympic programs, but it still felt like they were not comfortable in their own skin. Whereas now they really connect to each other and to an audience.
Right. I think they just feel so much more confident and comfortable on the ice now, and it really allows them to shine. They're a beautiful team and they have a ton of charisma, and it shows up more now. But here, you wouldn't have known that's what was coming because it just was not very good.
No. And obviously, we have to also mention our absolute favorites who we fell in love with here. So Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara. I have zero memory of them before the Olympics in Beijing. And seeing them here, the first time I saw them skate, I was like, I don't care what you're skating to. I will watch anything you do. They have that connection right out the gate.
In the 2 years following that, if you asked me anything about this Olympic pairs event, I would tell you 3 things. I would be like, Sway and Han were incredible. Alexa and Brandon really showed up and made a case for themselves. And that Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara were the team that stole my heart and kept my attention. Even though they landed 7th overall in this competition, they're the team that my mind always came back to. And with good reason, because they have done very well over the next couple of seasons, although, they've struggled with some injury and some other little inconsistency issues. But here, this is the thing that really just captured our hearts. They already had such quality. They had, some choreographic missed opportunities in the short program that kind of frustrated me. The things that always frustrate me whenever I see teams have great music and then just kind of have beats in the choreo that just miss the big moments.
Agreed.
But the free skate here was magical. It was joyful. It was fluid. Their jumps were terrific. That was just where we were both like, oh my gosh, emotionally, we connect to this team in such a huge way.
And they have such, for lack of a better term, such it factor. There is something about them that just pulls you in, especially their joy. It's contagious. You can tell how much they love being out there. But it makes me so happy that they brought this long program back at Worlds this year because it deserved another take. I was happy to see it again. And going back 2 years ago, it was that reminder of like, oh yeah, that's just perfect. It's just so good. It just made me so excited to see the next iteration of Riku and Ryu next year.
They were so good here. They've been so good over the last couple of seasons. They do have, the struggles in some of the jumps, particularly Riku has some issues.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger thing for them is just emotionally broadening their material.
Agreed.
And having their coaching team make stronger choices with music.
But I saw on the Instagrams recently that they have been working with Marie France.
Oh.
So I, to that point, have a little bit of a like, oh, okay, we might be seeing something a little different from Riku and Ryu next year.
Yeah, I'm here for that. Beyond that, those are the teams that are still in the mix at this point.
I mean, I guess you could say technically Alex and Brandon haven't verbally retired, even though we all know that they have retired. But
I really don't expect
that.
it.
No.
Yeah, I don't see that being the case. But
man, were they good here.
They were
so good. good.
The thing that really struck me in the rewatch here is how their free skate at the Olympics would have brought the house down if it had been allowed to be a full audience. Because again, this was still 2 years into the pandemic. It was basically just competitors and teammates and stuff that were
other Olympians that could enter.
Because the free skate here was just magnificent. It was powerful. It was joyful. Their lifts were so explosive. They were so charismatic. And then right afterwards, they'd go and win the world championships. They placed 6th here overall, but they were just astonishing. And it was so great to see Todd Sands in the kiss and cry with them.
Getting to see Todd Sand be there with them and be happy with them and celebrating was heartwarming.
Another thing that in going back to this that I hadn't really remembered was how fantastic Vanessa James and Eric Radford were.
Oh, they're so good. They're both such talented skaters. So them coming together is like making a super group.
You know, they landed 11th overall here, but it didn't really matter their placement. They were just so elegant. She is incredible in the air. He's like as good and impressive a male pairs partner as was in this entire competition.
I mean, the compliment you gave him was he reminds me of Guillaume.
Yeah, I was like, if Guillaume Cicerone was a pairs skater, he'd be Eric Radford. That was the way I felt.
That's a big compliment.
Yeah, they were gorgeous. I loved watching them here.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the Russian teams were incredible. No shade either to Ashley Kane and Timothy Leduc. They were beautiful here.
They were great. Yes. Thinking about how it whirls, the terrible fall that Ashley had.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of overshadowed my memory of their performance here. But they just had gorgeous lines, superior dance skills to a lot of the other teams.
They were just different too. Their aesthetic was so different. It made me miss them. And obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning, Sui and Han, I don't have words. Going back and rewatching them was like mind-blowing. It was that reminder of I hate saying this because I love all the skaters that are out there right now, but man, there is not another Sui and Han right now. And what they brought was so dynamic and so inspiring. Like, ugh. And she is terrifying in the best way.
The word I wrote down for them is commanding. They are so powerful, ferocious, masterclass performances. Everything about what Sui and Han brought to the ice was phenomenal. Watching that here again, if there'd been a real audience after their free skate, it would have been thunderous. It would have been like shake the rafters kind of response because it had one of the single best lifts I've ever seen.
Oh, for sure.
Watching that and realizing, their retirement afterwards was like, okay, here's where the sport diminished because you had them as the leader of the pack not having a clear replacement after this, and nobody has quite risen to their level.
At least not at a technical level. And like, I will also say though, it really did make me appreciate the forward trajectory of Deanna and Max this past season because we needed superstars essentially in this sport, and they are superstars. Like that ferociousness that Deanna brings reminds me of Sui, and that's a big compliment.
Yeah.
It's really helpful to have a pairs team that you watch and feel that pull that Sui and Han could bring you with them on this journey. And this is also no shade to the Russian teams who are also technically really, really strong, but just my preference is for sure Sui and Han there and Deanna and Max now. So I'm glad at least we have them.
Of course, the Russian teams, we haven't had them over the last couple of years, and quite a number of these Russian pair skaters were sanctioned after this because of their support of the Russian war on Ukraine. The team that really stood out to me was Mashina and Galyamov. They just had great character work, really powerful, charming skates. They were notably the pair that during the team competition that he sort of pile drived her at the end of their free skate. And I felt so bad watching that because she laughed it off with no problem.
But he looked mortified.
He looked like he was going to throw up. And I got it because there was a guy who obviously thought he had just killed his partner on the ice. And instead she got up laughing and just finished the skate.
Thank goodness.
So she was a trooper. But otherwise, they just had a more fun character than the other Russian teams.
I agree. I was actually looking forward to rewatching their programs because they do bring a fun, interesting, different kind of vibe to the ice. And obviously are technically extremely strong. So I could see why a lot of people miss watching them because they are a really, really strong team.
So jumping into the men's, so the men's competition here has a lot more names that are still in the mix. Now, there are very clearly some big ones who are not, right? Yuzuru Hanyu, Nathan Chen, Shoma Uno. right there.
It's like a gut punch when you say all their names together.
Right. You could do entire episodes about just the three of them and what they did here.
And maybe we should.
But we will mention a little bit about them towards the end of this. But I think we should just kind of run through relatively quickly all of these different guys who are in this mix, a lot of whom who have changed tremendously over the last couple of years. But if you want somebody who hasn't,
Roman
Zadowski from Canada ends up in last place in this competition.
I mean, he's changed in the sense that he did better at this Worlds.
Sure. But he didn't make the free skate, so he only did the short program at the Olympics.
Just gutting. And let's also note, Roman kind of got screwed at this Olympics, and it's not his fault, but it's also not Keegan Messing's fault. He ended up having to compete in the team competition in both events that he was not expecting to, because Keegan Messing had, I believe, gotten COVID and just wasn't able to even get to Beijing in time to do the team competition. So Roman's whole plan kind of got thrown out the window. So I will give him at least that. That was a rough way to go into the men's competition.
And again, just like what we were talking about earlier with like the German team, a lot of people got scrambled here. Keegan barely shows up in time to be a part of this competition. Vincent Zhou gets sick after the team and misses the men's individual competition entirely. So he's withdrawn on this. And lots of other people were affected by those travel issues and stuff too. So it was a really rough time for everybody. But Roman here gave up what I think of as a pretty typical Roman skate. He just throws away points by popping two of his jumps. He has magnificent spins. His quality is evident, but his jumps are just so unfocused and he just doesn't seem to know where he's at. And unfortunately, that feels fairly consistent with other things that we've seen from Roman. Incredible talent, so much potential, but very rarely seems to put it together.
It breaks my heart because he is so talented. Please, Roman, you've got 2 more years. Bring it all back.
What I think is an interesting trajectory here is, I believe in the second to last position was Alexander Selevko, who here just doesn't look technically complete. He doesn't really have his jumps together. It's really messy. To see where Alexander has gone from being a bottom of the heap Olympic skater there to this past season having a huge breakout moment at the European Championships, and to have suddenly gotten a whole bunch of support behind him and attention, and to be not a favorite because he still doesn't quite have the technical content to get him into, like, say, the top 6.
No, but he's a fan favorite for sure.
Yes, he's definitely a fan favorite now. He has so much charisma. He's got such a vibe on the ice. It's so different from a lot of the other skaters. You can see bits and pieces of it here, but in 2 years, he has radically evolved.
I am so excited to see where he goes because, agreed, you can see those hints of that charm and that charisma and that very different artistry. Like, his aesthetic is just totally different than anyone else's right now. So can't wait to see what he does. But kind of along those same lines, Lucas Britschke, talk about somebody who has changed in 2 years. I mean, wow. Just wow. I mean, he had tons of promise there. He looked good technically-ish. But man, he still looked so junior. And to go from that to, I think he was, 5th in the world? Damn, Lucas.
Yes.
Huge change in 2 years.
If you were just watching that event, you would not have looked at him and thought very much about his future prospects. He's not awful. I mean, he lands in like 23rd. He's pretty low in the overall ranking at the Olympics. You can see that joyful personality that he has show up in places. But also, like, the moment something goes wrong, the programs just come apart. To see where he's come in 2 years, where he's suddenly far more consistent, where he's so much fun, where his artistic point of view has solidified in very curious ways.
Yeah.
But they're so specific to him, and he's got such a genial kind of air and personality on the ice. It's a wild difference. So this is one of those places where you can say 2 years took a guy who didn't feel that exciting if this was your first exposure to him. And now he's in amongst the top men in the world and is definitely in the contention for the next 2 years. This is where we look at that. It's, if you're drawing charts of improvement, if you can jump that much in 2 years, what can you do in the next 2? That's where it's pretty interesting.
Kind of along those same lines, but a little less of a trajectory, but a more, to me, artistically exciting one is Donovan Carrillo. This is where we got introduced to his charisma.
The whole world got introduced.
And my God, his charisma level is already off the charts here. It's so good. And if you've been paying attention to skating at all, you know that his programs went somewhat viral. He became a celebrity in his own right just because it was such a novelty to have a charming, solid skater from Mexico. It was a thrill in and of itself. And now watching him at Worlds, he could move up. He really could. I was so impressed with him this season that going back and rewatching him from Beijing, he has made huge leaps in his technical abilities. So I'm excited to see what we see from Donovan in the next couple of years.
What you can already notice in his Olympic performance, beyond just that massive star power, that incredible, engaging personality that Donovan has, it's that his edges are awesome.
Oh, they're good.
He has really great edges.
Oh, and his spins.
And his spins are super sharp already. And what was so fun was just seeing after he finished his short program, he gets a solid score and then he realizes he qualified for the free skate, which was his whole target. He came to the Olympics just, I want to make the free skate. And he does it and knows it in the kiss and cry. And he's just out of his mind excited. And then he gives a really messy long.
Oh, yeah, it's messy.
But it doesn't really matter because it's not really about the points in that performance. It's really about winning hearts and making it known that he's a guy you're going to want to watch. And he's since become such a terrific show skater, and more shows are booking him. I think because he's such a fan favorite, it doesn't matter that his ranking isn't super high. You want to see this guy. But yeah, the jumps are getting better and he is improving, especially with his new coaching team.
Yes.
Yeah, things are really starting to look up for him.
The thing that genuinely hurts my soul is that we are not in an era where there are so many tours and so many shows like we were in the 90s and the 2000s, which if for any children listening who are young people or people who don't remember that at all, it was a thing back in the day where skaters of his caliber at his ranking would tour the United States, would tour everywhere, would become household names. And it just isn't that time anymore. And Donovan is one of those people that I feel like would just be everyone's favorite, regardless of medals, regardless of results, if we were still in that era. So I'm sad for him, but I'm excited for any opportunity I get to see him.
On kind of a different angle, looking at Boyang Jin, we've talked a lot about him in this past season. We love this guy. I so enjoy Boyang. He ends up in 9th at the Olympics, and top 10 finish is really good for a guy who even at that point is probably already on kind of the second half of his career. You can tell then and into now that he's a guy who's probably a little past his peak and yet still is capable of brilliance and showing up much stronger than you'd expect. But then he also has complete collapses like we saw at Worlds this year. And so seeing him here, it feels fairly consistent with what we've seen in the 2 years since. Admirable performances, big jumps, things that get a little wild and sloppy and out of control, but that he is always fun to watch. So watching it here, it doesn't feel like things have changed a whole lot for Boyang. It's just that sometimes he's going to skate up and give you something incredible. Other times it's just going to completely fall apart. And so you just have that feeling of a guy who is probably over the peak of his ability and yet is still a fantastic competitor and is always worthy of being on the ice because he's so good.
I'm so happy for him that in Beijing, he was able to show up the way he did. The long program wasn't as strong as the short, but at the same time, I still feel like he got off the ice to a hometown crowd that really appreciated what he put out there. He looked happy enough with the results. He didn't look like super bummed or anything. And to be skating in your home country, that's such an important thing. So I'm glad that he had a good enough skate. We've seen him skate up beyond that, like 4 continents this year. He was absolutely amazing.
Brilliant.
So you never know. I agree with you. I feel like he has just remained kind of a constant. And he may just continue to remain that constant through the next Olympics. It's hard to say. I always hope for good things for Boyang. He always just has good vibes, and I enjoy watching him.
If you want to go the opposite direction to show somebody who has wildly changed, it was watching the 14th place performance from France's Adam Chauhim-Fa here.
Good grief, has that been a change? I mean, this is bigger than Lucas.
Yes.
Much bigger.
Adam is already compelling. This was the first time where I really remembered seeing him. And, he came out and did a Star Wars program.
I love that Star Wars program.
Which
love it.
I'm a nerd, so I was excited about that. I love that he came out dressed as Anakin and had the whole vibe for it. I was like very surprised to see somebody at the Olympics doing that. It's super nerdy. And he already had spectacular jumps, the ones that he actually landed, but he was not fully under control. It reminded me a little bit of seeing like Kalmura, when Kalmura's power overwhelms his ability to command it. And so Adam just felt a little wild here in places. But the thing that most struck me was the free skate that he did to Daft Punk, because he's doing a program with EDM. It's just kind of a good vibe performance. It's just very happy and enthusiastic. The footwork sequence is brilliant in that program. He's so smiley. It's so fun. It's fast. Over the next 2 seasons, he's performed these incredible storytelling programs that are a lot more emotional and complex and darker. And so it's very interesting to go back and see something that feels as bright as this free skate.
But he's still so likable. There's something so enjoyable about his skating even here. It's just nowhere near as refined, and it doesn't have that same point of view that we now kind of know for Adam. I feel like he has engaged his creative core since then, and we have seen just such an evolution. So watching that trajectory, he had such a wildness to his skating back in 2022, which sounds like, in my day, he had such, like, it sounds like I'm talking about something so long ago, but it's 2 years. It gives me a lot of excitement and enthusiasm towards the next 2 years for him, because if he's made this much progress in 2 years, what can he do in 2 more?
And then if you look at his French teammate, Kevin Amos, here's where I think you've got a much more consistent overall set of performances. Now, obviously, discount the end of this past season where Kevin Amos really came apart and you saw a lot of issues. Here, I mean, he's stellar. He's such a complete skater here. The jumps are awesome. The footwork is amazing. It's just fun. His triple axel is just gorgeous. He gets really big scores for him here. There's I think a 93 on his short program, which was a big deal for Kevin here at the Olympics. But the note I wrote here is that beautiful but inconsistent, the Kevin Amos story. You have a skater who is just capable of so much drama, so much beauty on the ice, but especially in the free skate, it starts to come apart. So it does feel consistent with the later seasons.
It does, but my goodness, did I really love that long program. The short program got a much bigger response from those in the building, but his free skate, I don't know, it spoke to me. So rewatching it was just that reminder of how much I adore Kevin and how much I hope in the next season we see him back to form.
Yeah, that free skate is as powerful as anything he did in the following season. So again, it's that reminder that at this point he feels like a fully formed skater. It's just a matter of sustaining it for the next couple of years and coming back from those big breakdowns of this past year.
Well, I also think it's worth mentioning Denis Vasilyev's, who was spectacular here. He might not have been amongst the top men, but you could see his artistry coming through in such a big, big way. And you've only seen that evolve more since then. I was really, really happy to go back and rewatch, especially his short program.
I did not remember how freaking cool that short program was. It's so modern dancey. It's got a bit of an Asian flair to it. It's so expertly delivered. The jumps are all triples. He's just not a jumper in that same way, and that's always a bit of a setback for him. But he's just pro as all hell with his artistry. It's so refined. It has such a specific point of view. I think the thing that you said while we were watching it is that he would have been huge in the 90s.
Oh my God.
He would have been an absolute top tier superstar then, but the sport has kind of evolved past that thing.
Exactly everything I said about Donovan, just take that and add some to Denis Vasilyev's. The level of crowd pleaser superstar that I think he could have been in another time is outrageous.
I think what we've seen from him in the last 2 years, though, I think he's just rejected the need to be the competitive jumper. His programs have gotten more avant-garde. He's obviously put less focus into the hops. And when you see him in the gala, that's when you really see Denis Vasilyev's like who he really wants to be. So watching these here was a reminder that he was a real contender, but that what he's changing into now is a lot less about the competitive side of things and just being the skater that he wants to be. And it's a reminder that there's only a handful of skaters that have that expressive quality that he does, that he is just a gorgeous lyrical performer, and that the more we get to see that part of him, the better off we all are.
Speaking of gorgeous lyrical skaters, can I just say how much I forgot I loved Junwon Cha's short program?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was so good. And it reminded me of the fact that we used to say, like, we love June, but we just don't know that we connect with him. And I'm like, I connect the hell out of that program. Like, I very, very much connect with it, and I adore it. It was just stunning. And he almost broke 100 on that one, and it was such a bummer that he didn't.
He was underscored. They gave him a 99.51 on his short program there, and it was too low. The intensity, the drama, the killer skating skills, he was phenomenal in that short.
His free was not as phenomenal, but it was still really strong. And I feel like what we've seen since then has just, it's hard to say, because we saw him step up and step forward the following season, coming in second at Worlds, which was amazing and really felt like you were starting to see his era come to fruition. But then injury took him essentially out of the running last year. So where he'll land going forward into the next 2 years, I don't really know. From an artistic standpoint, he is above so many in terms of what he can do and what he's capable of, and the drama he brings to the ice, just monstrous. But can he keep up with Ilya, Yuma, Adam? I genuinely don't know. I have to think about this.
And if there's something that the free skate here illustrates that is consistent with the last few seasons, is that when June falls, he falls bad.
Yeah.
And when you think about injuries and struggles coming back from things, it's like he doesn't seem to know how to fall, which is a bad thing for a skater. When he flops, he goes down hard and struggles to get back up from them. And that kind of thing worries me, because it really can take the wind out of a program. And he had a horrible first jump in his free skate here. He came back really strong. He showed the grit and that tremendous musicality that he has. Obviously, we've seen him be one of the best in the world, and I still think he is one of the best in the world, but it's just going to be a matter of what his conditioning looks like through the next couple of seasons and how his training brings his jumps and his consistency back up to par.
You know, not to the same degree, but similarly, Matteo Rizzo, in the sense that we've seen him take these big step forwards over the past 2 years, and he's such a musical skater, and he's just a joy to watch. But here you see someone who's inconsistent, not quite the guy we've seen recently, but now coming back from injury, he's having to like relearn all of his jumps post surgery. So it is kind of a crapshoot. We saw him place 16th here. Will it be much higher, or can he break into that top 6 possibly? Does he have the technical ability to do that? I don't know, but I love Matteo, and I hope we see that version of him that we've seen over the past couple of seasons show back up in time for Milano.
You know, if you look at Matteo's Fix You program and how
so good,
incredible it's been here, there's definitely some issues. He's also just physically changed a lot. And looking at him and both Adam, you can see them fill out a little bit more. That physical maturity, that emotional maturity shows up on both of them. But here, Matteo looks kind of boyish compared to what he brings to the ice now. And I think that maturity that he's grown will go a long way, as long as he can just fix the physical stuff post-injury and recovery.
I hope so. I really do. If we're talking also about people that it'll be curious to see what happens in the next 2 years, Jason Brown's at the top of the list for me. He was 6th here. He was 5th or 6th the following year at Worlds. I cannot remember if it was 5th or 6th. And then he's in the top 6 again this season. So you want to talk consistency, the man is consistent. No matter who he's skating against, he's sticking in there. And honestly, I'm just amazed by what he's done. And his Centerman short program is amongst my favorite programs ever. The one he does in Beijing, it's mind-blowing. I don't know ever what to expect whenever Jason steps on the ice, but I know I'm always going to love it. The man is so good. I know we all know that.
Yeah.
But it's great to have those moments of a reminder of like, oh yeah, I can just sit back and enjoy.
Yeah, these 2 programs at this Olympics were nearly flawless.
Oh my gosh,
he doesn't have the bombast of quads, but he has refinement. He makes everything look effortless. His raw skating skills are just unmatched, right? Like he's just phenomenal in this. And his presentation scores were still low based on what he was giving
They
in
were
like the
too
Cinnamon
low.
program.
They were too low.
He really was unreal here. And it's kind of like, we talked about Denise not having anything but the triples and that holds him back. Obviously, if Jason had quads and could perform them as well as anything else, he'd be the best skater in the world. But when it comes to just sheer musicality and performance quality, almost nobody rivals him. He's just unreal here. And the fact that he stayed so consistent while not competing full time, spending a lot of his time as a show skater and touring rather than doing a lot of competitions, and still getting to the end of the seasons and being as highly ranked as he is just a testament to his incredible ability.
And I really, really hope that he is setting a precedent for a new kind of era in men's skating where, okay, maybe you're not at the top 3. Maybe you're not competing with the quad god for that medal, but you can still show up and still be super competitive and just make the sport broader, more interesting, because there's so much variety in it.
Yeah. You mentioned the quad god. Ilya Malinin did not get to these Olympics.
Nope.
So he was not chosen.
Because of Jason.
Right. Jason was chosen over him for the team here. And what we saw from Ilya in the following Worlds was that he wasn't quite ready at that international level yet. So when we think about in 2 years who we would expect to be going for those podiums, the last person in this competition who is really the other big podium threat is Yuma Kageyama, who took silver here and was extraordinary, and yet has grown tremendously, particularly in this last season with his work with Carolina Costner, with her choreo and mentorship. You can see him here. I mean, he scored a 108.12 in the short program. It is so charming, so fast. The jumps are huge. It's so dynamic, and yet it's playful and it's cheeky. And
it's really appropriate for his age and kind of where he was at with his skills at that point.
Yeah. And then even though there's some flaws in his free skate at this Olympics, it was still terrific. And obviously he took silver and he was brilliant. But when you look at what he's done in this past year, after going through recovery, after being out of competition because of injury, having to rebuild, put his skills back together, slowly reintroduce jumps, and just to focus on maturing his artistic point of view, his delivery, everything that he's done with Carolina in this last year, it really illustrates how a person can go from a terrific skater to a phenomenal one. Just 2 years since then, we've seen Yuma advance significantly, and he is already the Olympic silver medalist.
He was already the Olympic silver medalist. He essentially had a year away because of injury, and then has slowly had to come back over the past season, and then is a silver medalist at Worlds again and looks better than ever. It's remarkable. It's why I think looking forward as we do over the next couple of years, but for us right now, like even looking forward to our 3rd episode in this series of when we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen in Milano, that's hard because Yuma really is going to put the pressure on, and I love it. He had said something recently that really has just stuck with me, which was that he doesn't think at this moment there is any way he can beat Ilya, so he's going to go home and find a way. Yes, Yuma, do that. Not that I want him to win or Ilya to win. It's not that. It's that I love that attitude of like, well, I can't beat him today, so I've got to figure out what I need to do to go beat him. Not in any aggressive or salty way. No, this is a competition and he wants to win. And I love that. Like, keep bringing it. I want to see that rivalry of him and Adam and Ilya continue to evolve the sport.
Yes. And, when we look at the people who retired out of this, like I said, I mean, you have the gold-winning performance from Nathan Chen, which is goated, right? Like this
my God.
These are legendary performances. We don't need to rehash them here.
Can I just one thing, just for my own sake, because I didn't get to say it whenever it was happening, because we did not have this podcast then.
Sure.
But his short program there, unbelievably clutch, and oh my God, it's the best. It's my favorite Nathan performance ever because of all of the baggage that he brought in from Pyeongchang and coming out and delivering that ferocious of a short program. Ugh, I still feel it in my bones. Okay, I'll let it go now.
Oh yeah, so good. Both so good. My preference has always been for that long program, but they're both phenomenal there. This was also the last Olympic performance from Keegan Messing. He retired after the next season. Notably, he had the home long program here which is delivered well here. And again, we mentioned that Keegan had to come in after COVID, barely got there in time. He skates really well for a guy who basically got off a plane and got on the ice. He landed in 11th overall, which was really strong. But if you look at that the long program, he did it a year later because he kept it for the next season. And his performance at Four Continents the following season is iconic. The difference in maturity of his skating in just a year, when he went into his final season, knowing it was going to be his final season, everybody knew it was going to be his final season. It informed that skate in an emotional and mature way that I think is really special and really important. And so seeing those two kind of side by side, it's such a radically different thing.
But it's also extremely important to mention the fact that this was Yuzuru Hanyu's final competition. And while it was not the best, it was just not. We can all admit that. It was, one, astounding that he went there for one purpose, and that was to land a quad axel, which he did not do, but attempted. And coming to the Olympics after really no competitive prep, had, worked at home on it, obviously, but had no competitions leading up to it, stepped into the Olympics and still landed in fourth because he's Yuzu. Unbelievable, but also makes you realize that he would have been on the podium had he not tried that move.
His programs were a little sloppy and he looked out of condition. He was really breathing hard after the long program and he had a couple of falls. He popped a jump in the short program. The fact that he's in fourth, even after those errors, is a testament to his sheer ability and quality. But what I think is most notable about Yuzu from this Olympics is his gala performance.
100%, because that's where you see him for real.
His gala performance is the best overall skate of the entire Olympics.
I agree with you.
In my opinion, over everything else that we see.
Over everything else competitively, artistically, whatever it is, his show program and the exhibition, it's like you can't breathe while you're watching it. It's just magic.
It's a true work of art. It is sublime. It is beautiful. It is the reminder of why Yuzuru Hanyu is one of the greatest of all time. Competitively in that particular Olympics, not up to the standards you would expect from him.
Still better than almost everyone else, but still.
But the gala performance is truly stunning. A remarkable piece of work on ice. And
I could watch that every day.
Yeah. Okay, so Adrian and Wendy from the future, again, we just want to bookend that conversation with a few different things because, again, we recorded that 8 months ago in the summer of 2024. A whole season has happened. Almost an entire season has happened in between. And so that does change a few perspectives.
One thing I do feel required to mention is we didn't talk about Shoma. I know he is not going to be in the next Olympics. He is retired. I am still sad about this. But when we recorded this, it was really close to when he actually announced his retirement.
Yeah, we had just kind of done an entire episode on him. So I think that's why we didn't talk about him here.
But I did feel remiss as I was re-listening to this going, where's Shoma? Especially his short program in Beijing was amazing. All my love is still with Shoma. And I think I was just still grieving his retirement and couldn't bring myself to speak about him. That's what I'm assuming.
I think that also early in the episode, we talk about the NBCification of Olympic stuff and conjecturing on when that was going to start. And for us in the present, that happened just this week, where we've started seeing, now that it is officially 1 year out, NBC was posting a whole bunch of stuff specifically with Isabeau Levito, which is great because Isabeau is this super engaging character in American women's skating. And particularly because of her roots in Italy, it makes a lot of sense to use her. But it is also kind of strange to be using somebody who has barely appeared in this season and not our two-time national champion, Amber Glenn. But I think a lot of that is based around photos that they took this past summer before the season even started, that they're using in all of these promotional materials.
And I am sure we will be seeing plenty of Amber leading into Milano Cortina.
And just a few other kind of notes of things that we talked in here. Like obviously in that conversation, we were talking about how much Ghiardi and Ambrosini had improved over the course of like 2 years after the Olympics because they'd been pretty bad at the Olympics. Unfortunately, this season, they have not been so great again. They are still beautiful, wonderful skaters, but it just hasn't gone as well as what we were hoping for. We talked about Lucas Bridgke having a big come up afterwards, and that has obviously really come true since he just won Europeans after having kind of a so-so season so far. So that was kind of a big deal.
Felt very spot on. Like we see things coming for him, and well, here he is.
Yeah. We mentioned Kevin Amos having, some great skates at the Olympics. at the point when we were talking about it was right after he'd had an abysmal end to his last season. You know, what we've seen from him this season is big highs and some pretty low lows. But again, that's kind of the Kevin Amos story. Like, it is back and forth between utter brilliance and things that kind of fall apart. And then the last one is, and that'll, you know, essentially segue us into next week's episode, was us looking at Junwon Cha and how brilliant he was at the last Olympics, how underscored he was, and then him having some trouble over the next season or so because of injury. But of course, here in the present, we know that June just won the Asian Winter Games, which is a pretty big deal for him and something that we will talk about in the coming episode.
So to your point, our next episode will be much more in the present. We'll be talking about the Asian Winter Games that are happening right now, as well as Challenge Cup, which is happening this coming weekend. We'll also be taking a look at the Four Continents Championship, which is happening next weekend and has a lot of people that we're keeping our eye on, including Junwon Cha, to continue talking about June, which I'm always happy to do, and Cheon Kim and Taken Bates and many, many more.
So yeah, look forward to that in our coming episode. And for Scoreography, I'm Adrian Buskey.
And I'm Wendy Buskey.
And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.